Congratulations, you are the strongest!
Well, thank you. I bet it's the mustache that's doing it. It's the mustache, right?
No, I don't think it... Wait, is it? Ladies, gentlemen, and pals of all ages, there are a lot of different ways to think about this game, but one that everyone will have to consider at least a little bit is combat. There are various stages of challenging combat along your way through the game, and there are tons of ways to make that easier, with one of the simplest ones just being to use strong pals. Well, I know there are a lot of people that just want to use the pals that they like, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That does mean there are simply pals that are more suited to combat and better at it than others. So today we're going to break down a tier list of the top 40 or so combat pals, the main cutoff being if it doesn't make this list, it's just significantly weaker overall. The pals even in the lowest tier, to the point that if you are using it, it's because you want to, really, not because it's strong. As well, with the disclaimer that I have seen a lot of tier lists out there based purely on stats, specifically the numbers that we use to differentiate the species, which are their growth rates, which is a whole mathematical formula, but for the sake of comprehension, higher number means they gain more of the stat per level than a pal with lower number growth rates, thus differentiating these species. That said, while stats are a big part of this, they are far from everything to consider when deciding just how strong a pal is. So we will also be talking quite a bit about partner skills and just general usability functions, as well as just my opinions on some and why I think they should maybe be less or more used than they currently are. For example, if the partner skill makes them a mountable pal. Mountable pals have a distinct advantage over those that aren't, which is that attack cooldowns while riding them are separate from the attack cooldowns while you're not riding them, meaning you can give a pal 3 super high damage but long cooldown attacks and then just watch them launch the same strong attack twice within a few seconds just because you got on or off of it. Without further ado then, we will generally be going from worst to best, at least from the ones on this list, from bottom to top, but with the exception that I do want to start by talking immediately about Sweepa, all the way at the top of this. Statistically speaking, Sweepa is not really a combat pal, it's just not got that oomph in its stats that a lot of pals do, but thanks to two things, it is undeniably in its own tier, above every other combat pal in the game. The first is its combination with Sui, where any Sui in the party boosts the attack and defense of Sweepa by 12% base up to 24% per Sui if they are full 4-star condensed. Sweepa itself also gains a self-attack buff as you condense into it even past the normal stat gain of condensing, meaning there is a massive potential for buffing Sweepa up, but the real one that Sweepa is up here is quite simply a bug. While riding Sweepa, if you go to your party screen and drop Sui out of your party, then dismount and pick it back up, the buff it gives to Sweepa becomes doubled. Essentially, Sweepa doesn't lose the buff when you drop a Sui, so when you pick it back up again, it gains an extra stack. You can just sort of keep doing that pretty much infinitely though, even with the same Sui, which means that Sweepa does not actually have a limit to its potential attack and defense step in this stage of the game. It is technically speaking infinite, because that bug's existence makes Sweepa an absolute anomaly, which is why it is where it is. Then let's round up back down to the D tier. I'll be spending a lot less time per pal than that normally, Sweepa just deserves some extra love. And this tier starts with Kitsune. 115 attack growth rate is pretty good, not quite the best, but decent. Then 100 on HP and defense is perfectly acceptable, not fantastic, but decent. Generally speaking, we're also prioritizing the attack stat over the others to begin with. However, its partner skill has no bearing on combat with this one, which in itself does give it a bit of a disadvantage compared to similarly statted pals, but it does gain the cooldown reset function of mounting, which is nice. Still a great combat pal, just not high compared to the bar that we've set for this grouping of top tier pals. Next up is Verdash, 115 attack again, but only 90 on HP and defense, so equally offensive, a bit squishier, but its partner skill makes up for that gap a bit, making the player's damage count as grass and giving movement speed to the player as well. The main situation this excels in is against ground pals, as making the player damage super effective is a 50% bonus damage bonus, but outside of that, it's nothing too special for combat. After that, we've got Beacon, 115 attack growth rate, 105 HP, which is a bump down from the last two, but then 80 defense, which sort of evens it back down. This one, however, gets a bump from its partner skill as well, being rideable, changing player damage to electric to let you super affect water types, and also giving the player a 50% attack boost based up to 100% at partner skill rank 5, so that makes it a nice jump above the previous two. Then we have Fengalope, 110 attack, so going down on that just a touch, but 110 HP and 90 defense, so not bad there at all. More importantly, this one is rideable and also the fastest ground mount that exists, so mount resets for this are a thing. The speed makes it easy to dodge enemy attacks while actively riding, and it has a pretty strong species unique attack too. You could argue it might go a bit lower than this, even just because it's a neutral type pal, which means that it can't super effect unless it uses type mismatching moves, and using a move type that doesn't match your pal in itself is a 20% damage loss, so that's definitely a weak spot if I had to call one out. Next up is Relaxaurus Lux, 110 attack, 110 HP, 75 defense, so pretty average on the defense front for this side of the tier list, but its partner skill both makes it rideable, which allows the mount cooldown resets, but also has a missile launcher attached to it that does respectable damage on its own. Then comes Reptyro, 105 attack, but 110 HP and 120 defense, so notably beefier and tankier than the ones before it, but it comes at the cost of not having a combat partner skill, so you could argue this is weaker than the others if you focus purely on attack power, but I do think the tankiness here deserves at least some respect. After that is Phalaris, 105 attack, 100 HP, 110 defense, so not exceptional in that sense, but it does have a riding partner skill for mount cooldown resets, but no other combat applications of its partner skill, so it's good, but just not particularly exceptional. Then we have Univolt, 105 attack, 80 HP, 105 defense, so not great there, but it is rideable, so mount cooldown reset, along with this also being a pal that changes your damage to electric type, so strong against water types, and also one that gives you that hidden 50 to 100% player attack bonus while mounted too, and that bumps it up quite a bit just by itself. Next up is Incineram Noct, 105 attack, 95 HP, 85 defense, but the partner skill is actually a powered up version of a skill that it normally has, being up to 3 times damage when full 4-star condensed, which makes that skill actually really strong. Not to mention that it actually applies to the normal version of the move that the pal already has, which means that you also get a 3 times bonus whenever it uses the regular version of the attack too. And if you want to actually be really cheeky, you can reset partner skill cooldowns in the game by dropping a pal out of your party inventory and immediately picking them back up, which makes this one definitely worth its slot here. And finally for the D tier we have Grizzbolt. 100 attack makes its tied lowest on the list, 105 and 100 defense isn't bad, but the trick here is Grizzbolt is both rideable for mount cooldown resets, but also has its whole minigun shenanigans, which does actually do pretty decent damage if you fully condense into it. Moving on to the C tier then, we will be starting this one with Mossanda Lux. Full 100s across the board on attack, HP, and defense, but rideable for mount cooldown resets, and more importantly has access to the grenade launcher while mounted, which is an unstoppable force of stun locking against the majority of enemies in the game. If they get hit by the grenade launcher, they get stunned. If you wait between shots, you extend the stun. For solo play, this doesn't really add a whole lot as far as actual combat effectiveness really, aside from maybe giving you some time to heal if you space out the shots and it lets your regen actually start again, but this one really shines in multiplayer where one person can be using this, just stun locking a powerful alpha or something, while the other person lays into it completely, just focusing on damage and nothing else. After that is Ice Reptyro, and the only difference between this and regular Reptyro, aside from obviously swapping to Ice Element, is that it gains an even higher defense number, up to 130 growth rate, making it tied for the 4th highest defense in the whole game. Then let's talk about Orserk, the Lord of Lightning. This is a fun one because his partner skill is non-combat really. He isn't mountable, so he doesn't get those bonuses. He's just a pure stat stick with 130 attack, tied as the 3rd highest attack value in the game, which is nuts. He also has 100 of each other stat, which isn't bad, but he also has a fantastic species unique attack skill too to even boost it further. Next up we've got Astagon, non-combat partner skill, but it does allow riding so that you can do the mount cooldown resets, 125 attack, so a touch lower than Orserk, but 100 HP and 125 defense, which is quite an exceptional defense too. All those things together, edging it out just a bit over Orserk for me. Following that, we've got Ragnahawk, 105 attack, which is not a thing you'll hear much more as we progress up through the list, 95 HP, but an unusually high 120 defense. As well, being a rideable mount, gets mount cooldown resetting, it's relatively quick, and also a flying mount, which lets you dodge stuff pretty well while riding. And it's also one of the riding pals that switches your element to fire, letting the player themselves super affect both ice and grass types while mounting, and also gives the player that hidden 50 to 100% attack stat bonus. Then we have Suzaku and Suzaka Aqua, who we'll be talking about as a sort of combo entry, 105 attack, 105 defense, and then 120 HP on Suzaku, 125 on the Aqua variant, so it gets a very slight edge. Rideable through partner skill, which means mount cooldown resets, and also these ones have a bonus effect of further boosting damage with their elemental type specifically by 50% at partner skill rank 1, but 100% at full partner skill rank 5, which effectively means that when you are riding them, they deal double damage, making their somewhat lower attack stat a complete non-issue. After that, we move on up to the B tier, and this one I will be starting with Felbat, 105 attack, 100 HP, 110 defense, which is pretty nice. Not a rideable pal, but has a semi-unique partner skill that gives both itself itself and the player up to 6% lifesteal on damage dealt when fully 4-star condensed into. Lavender does this as well, but simply has worse stats and also is a neutral type, so no super effect matchups, meaning Felbat is actually just superior for this purpose by a pretty large margin, and thus fills a pretty special niche. Next up is Van Worn, 115 attack, which is really respectable. 90 HP and defense are pretty reasonable too. Also a rideable pal, so mount cooldown reset is a factor, and it also gives you a bonus to weak spot damage while you are riding them, which scales from 20% up to 40% at partner skill level 5, so that's a really nice bonus on top of it all too. Following that we have Bushi, 125 attack, which is extremely solid, but only 80 HP and defense, so a bit of a glass cannon relatively speaking, and its partner skill is like Incineram Noct, being just a super powered up version of one of its normal attacks, dealing up to 3 times the damage though that it normally would at max partner skill level. That said, because Bushi's natural attack growth rate is as high as it is, this has a much greater effect on him, thus it is a much higher placement than Incineram Noct, especially when you combine it with the dropping from the party to reset partner skill cooldown thing. Then we have Jormuntide, 120 attack, which is really good, 130 HP and 100 defense, so reasonably tanky as well. Rideable, which allows for mount cooldown resets, but doesn't have any combat benefits outside of that. The one secondary concern I have for this pal is that it is generally just massive. Even the non-alpha versions are really big, which makes it a lot easier for enemy pals to actually connect attacks, so the tankiness is sort of evened out just by being hit more often than most pals are. After that, finishing off the B tier, and no, this is not a joke, Elizabeth combined with B-Guard. This one is pretty simple. Elizabeth is 105 attack, 90 HP, and 100 defense. It's not crazy, but it has the same interaction with B-Guard that Sweepa does with Sui, meaning you can get right around 100% attack and defense bonus from having a party full of its supplicants, though because you cannot mount Elizabeth, you can't do the bug that makes Sweepa actually just ridiculously, exploitively just overpowered. So Elizabeth is instead just a very respectable top of B tier. Starting off the A tier then, we have Lyleen and Lyleen Noct. 110 attack, 110 HP, 115 defense on Lyleen Noct, while only 105 on regular Lyleen, which is why Noct is ranked just a touch higher. The main reason these are here, despite those stats that would generally place them a fair bit lower, is because they again have a relatively unique partner skill. Not one that assists in damage by any means, but instead one that heals the player in a burst when activated, as opposed to the passive lifesteal of Felbat. The main advantage to burst over sustained healing is that you can throw Lyleen out just for a moment, just for the heal, then immediately switch back off of it to your actual main combat pals, which is why I thought it deserved a tier up from Felbat. Next up we have Anubis, and I know a lot of people would probably put him in a higher tier, but hear me out on this. 130 attack is great, 120 HP and 100 defense is quite tanky too. He also has multiple unique strong species-specific attacks, but he's just too small, and a lot of his moves are extremely close range with small hitboxes. There's a lot that he does do well, even changing player damage type to ground, and providing a small attack boost when out too. But in my experience in actual in-the-field testing, Anubis tends to miss a lot of attacks, which still puts them on cooldown, and makes him less effective than he could be given the stats and moveset that he has. Then we have Pengullet, and this one is very simple, not worth using combat-wise outside of one momentary ability, its partner skill, which lets you fire it out of a rocket launcher. That said, it does pretty damn respectable damage when you do so. So if you literally have an empty pal slot and you just want an extra burst of damage, there's nothing wrong with including this little guy. Hell, while it is supposed to actually kill the Pengullet when you do this, you could also technically run around with 5 of them and give them the Burly Body skill, which increases their defense and actually makes this not kill them. That way you can have them survive the explosion and use them again, letting you just cycle through a ton of different Pengullet rocket launchers as your method of combat. And as silly as that sounds, it's actually not bad. After that is Van Worm Christ, 120 attack, which is a step up from regular Van Worm, 90 HP, and then 95 defense, which is also a bit of a step up. The rest is pretty much the same, except that it's ice type, routable mount, cooldown reset is really nice, bonus damage to weak points, all around just solid, just a bump up in stats from its normal version. Following that we have Hell Zephyr, 125 attack, which is great, 100 HP, 100 defense isn't bad, but it's rideable, so we get the mount cooldown resets, it changes player damage to dark while being ridden, which lets you super effect neutral pals, and it also is one that gives the hidden player attack stat bonus of 50 to 100% depending on partner skill level, so it's really just solid all around. After that we have Gobfin as well as Gobfin Ignis, which I just generally wouldn't use as your active combat pal, but they are absolutely top tier party fillers, with the main reason being for each one that you have in your party, you get 10 to 20% bonus attack stat on your player depending on the partner skill level, and this stacks up to pretty silly levels that you can take significant advantage of. You could argue the pal itself is not the strongest, but it also is a core component opponent, and one of the strongest sort of team comps that exists, which is the one where the player is actually the main damage dealer. So I felt that they deserved this spot at minimum. Also worth noting, there are a lot of party filler pals that boost different element type damage as well, just by being in your party. They didn't make the cut more just for space concerns, because I'd have to include every single one if I was doing that, but know that every one of those is very good in their own purpose, in their own place, and a build focused around making just one singular pal incredibly strong. Then finishing off the A tier, maybe a controversial choice, Paladius, the first legendary on the list. 120 attack, 130 HP, and 145 defense. So extremely tanky, highest defense stat in the whole game, but 120 attack is for a legendary a bit low. The partner skill is not combat based either, though it is rideable for the mount cooldown reset. Honestly, the stats are still great. The main reason this is the only legendary below the S tier is that it is also a neutral type pal, so it just cannot physically get super effective damage on anything unless, like I mentioned earlier, you go to out of type moves, which removes the inherent same type attack bonus of 20%, which would cost you 20% damage overall. So just generally speaking, while it is an absolute menace compared to even the D or C tier pals, even the Bs for a lot of them, it just has limited top end potential compared to the other ones I'm going to put above it. That said, let's start off our S tier with Blazamut. At this point in this list, every single pal is a powerhouse. The difference between them is just little bits of percentages for the most part, or non-attack stat or tinier things. They are each all capable of carrying through the endgame as your main pal without really switching them outside of unfavorable type matchups. Blazamut has 125 attack growth rate, which is great, 100 HP and 120 defense, which is reasonably tanky as well. It is a rideable pal, so mount cooldown resets, and more importantly, it is one of the pals that boosts the damage dealt with its own elemental type while ridden by 50 to 100%, meaning while riding it, its attack stat will be basically doubled, and that is just silly strong. Following that is actually Jormuntide Ignis, another fire pal, funnily enough, though this one is also part dragon type. 130 attack, so just a touch higher, 130 HP, which is massive, and 100 defense, which is decent too. This is also a rideable pal though, and is actually one that boosts damage with its elemental type while ridden by up to 100%. So essentially, this is just Blazamut, but it has slightly better stats, and also has access to dragon type moves with the same type attack bonus too. Somehow, they just made Jormuntide Ignis just so much stronger than base Jormuntide. I think that's crazy. Next up is Shadowbeak, and this one is pretty special. 120 attack growth rate, 120 HP, 140 defense, the second highest defense in the game. So incredibly tanky, but with a high damage stat too. That's a really good attack stat. Its unique attack, Divine Disaster, is 160 power, one of the few attacks of that power ranking in the game, and it is also a rideable mount, which means the high cooldown on an attack like that is not a big deal, because again, we can reset it. On top of that, it also is one of the pals that boosts its own element type damage by 50 to 100% while ridden, which makes this one just absolutely nasty when fully set up. Then we have Necromus, our second legendary of the day, 145 attack stat, the highest in the entire game as a base, 130 HP and 135 defense. And it's worth mentioning, of course, that specifically the alpha legendaries, if you catch them in the wild, have a massive increase in HP compared to what they get if you were to breed into them. So that's a bonus too if you were to somehow get a perfect one in the wild. It has great attacks, fantastic speed, and hitboxes allow it to hit its targets consistently. It's rideable for mount cooldown resetting, and it's just very much generally strong. Shadowbeak is stronger while being ridden, but Necromus is stronger without that kind of specific management. So which one is better really depends on how you want to play around with the pal, especially as they are both dark types to begin with, and again, Necromus does have that HP bonus. Then we have Jetragon, 140 attack growth rate, tied for second in the game, just behind Necromus, 110 HP, 110 defense, which are both sort of just decent, actually. Jetragon's defensive strength, however, comes from its insane speed. The same speed that it uses while you fly around on it is the speed that it uses in combat, which means that you can use that to just genuinely dodge attacks just from movement very easily. On top of that, it is a rideable pal, so mount cooldown resets, and it's also one that gets a missile launcher that you can fire as part of the partner skill, and as you rank the partner skill up, the damage can get pretty decent on that too. Then we have Frostallion Noct, the sort of technical legendary. 140 attack, 140 HP, 135 defense, probably just the best overall stats on any pal in the game. Extremely well-rounded, being tied for second in attack, third in HP, and also being third in defense. And that's before even considering that it is a rideable pal, so mount cooldown resets, as well as being one of the pals that boosts its own elemental type damage while mounted by up to 100%. And even past that, it has an extra bonus of also turning the player's attack damage into dark type as well, which would then also be having that extra damage bonus applied to it. So basically, this is the absolute most desirable combat partner skill, boosting the pal's own damage by 100%, while also giving the player a 100% damage boost at partner skill level 5. And more specifically, while there are mounts that we talked about earlier that give the player up to 100% attack stat boost, that is actually quite different. Attack stat boosts stack additively with each other, meaning the more of them that you have, the less valuable each one is. It's a diminishing return. However, this specific bonus is just double damage with dark element attacks. It is a completely separate multiplier, and the fact that this pal also makes the player's damage count as dark makes it absolutely nasty for player damage based builds. But then, of course, on top of that, it affects itself, doubling its own damage. It already has some of the best stats in the whole game, and it also gets cooldown reset. So as a whole, it's just absolutely nuts. The final one for S tier then is honestly a bit of a subjective one. You could definitely argue it should be placed at least below Frostallion Noct, but I felt it deserved a spotlight here, and that is Gorirat. This gorilla pal is still a bit misunderstood. It only has 95 attack growth rate, 90 HP and defense, so on the surface it is comparatively quite low to everything on the list. It is not rideable, so it doesn't get the mount cooldown resets that I've been talking about a lot, but its partner skill sends it into a Berserk Rage, increasing its attack stat by up to 200% at full partner skill level, which means that it would be dealing 3 times its normal damage when this is active, making it hit the highest base attack stat in the game while active, being just slightest touch lower than Frostallion Noct's attack with its own mounted damage boost, but without the requirement that you have to be mounted for it to happen. So this is a much more prominently active boost. As well as we discussed, you can reset partner skill cooldowns by dropping the pal and then picking them back up, which allows you to essentially keep this at 100% uptime too. Of course, the only other thing is that this is a neutral type pal, so no super effective attacks without losing out on same type attack bonus, but with its massively buffable attack stat, it more than makes up for that loss. Finally then we have our S+ tier, and in this tier is one pal and one pal only, which is base regular Frostallion. Frostallion is identical to its variant, except obviously being ice type, which makes it strong against dragon types, which are much more prevalent and dangerous pals than neutral types are, and it also has 120 defense instead of 135, so a reasonable drop there comparatively, but this is more than made up for by being an alpha legendary, and again, alpha legendaries caught in the wild have a significant amount of bonus health over the ones that you breed down from them. So because Frostallion Noct is only attainable through breeding, it can never actually quite reach the same heights of stats as a wild alpha Frostallion that you would somehow just happen to find with absolutely perfect passives and IVs and everything. Yes, the chances of this happening are exceedingly lower than just breeding a perfect Frostallion Noct, but if we're being technically correct,
the best kind of correct,
Frostallion simply has a notably higher potential power ceiling while providing all of these same secondary bonuses both to itself and to the player, as well as just being honestly a better element to have it on generally too. And that just about does it then, everyone. A tier list of the top 40 or so pals for combat purposes in the game, stats, partner skills, contextual interactions, hidden bonuses, all these things taken into consideration, and because of that my bias is definitely in here a bit, but that's also the bias of someone who has spent a ridiculous amount of time not only playing the game itself, but also researching and looking into the finer details of it all. Hopefully this helps you out in some way then, maybe giving you some ideas for stuff to build around and have some fun with while decimating the largest challenges that currently exist. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.